At this point, it's tempting to decide who's telling the truth. The boyfriend says he's being trapped inside the apartment, while the girlfriend insists she's done everything she can to get him home safely. But experienced officers usually avoid making that judgment too early. Instead, they begin asking a different question: who actually has legal control over the property, and what options have already been offered? Notice what the officers are doing here. They're separating the two individuals before asking follow-up questions. That's not accidental. It's a common investigative technique designed to reduce outside influence and allow each person to give an independent account of what happened. The woman's story contains several specific details. She says she offered to call an Uber, offered to contact his mother, and even suggested alternative ways for him to leave. She also claims he damaged his own phone, threw away her vape, and refused multiple opportunities to walk out voluntarily. Now, none of those statements have been proven at this stage. Officers aren't assuming they're true simply because she says them, but they are listening for consistency, specificity, and whether both versions of the story overlap in meaningful ways. One interesting point is that both people actually agree on several facts. Both acknowledge that he had been drinking. Both acknowledge that transportation became a problem, and neither disputes that he no longer has a working phone. Those shared facts often become more important than the accusations themselves. Another thing worth noticing is that this has quietly shifted from a relationship dispute into a property rights issue. If the apartment legally belongs to her and she no longer wants him there, the officers now have to determine whether he has any legal right to remain inside. Up to this point, they're still trying to avoid an arrest. They're gathering information, looking for voluntary compliance, and searching for a solution that gets everyone separated safely. Whether that remains possible will depend almost entirely on what happens next. This is probably the most important turning point in the entire encounter. Many viewers focus on the argument over the alcohol, but that's not actually the central issue from a legal perspective. The real issue is whether the subject is willing to comply with a lawful request to leave private property after the property owner has withdrawn permission for him to remain. Notice how the officers continue offering solutions instead of immediately making an arrest. They don't simply tell him to leave and walk away. They offer transportation to a hotel, ask where he'd like to go, and even help him think through possible destinations. Those options matter because they demonstrate that the officers are attempting to resolve the situation peacefully before using enforcement. But then another factor enters the picture: alcohol dependency. The man repeatedly insists that he cannot leave without his beer. Later, he even says he's afraid of going into withdrawal. Whether that's medically accurate in his specific case isn't something the officers can determine on the spot, but it does provide insight into his decision-making. Addiction often changes a person's priorities. Instead of focusing on avoiding that can make negotiations extremely difficult because the conversation is no longer about transportation. It's about satisfying an addiction that the officers cannot legally accommodate. From the officer's perspective, allowing open alcohol into a patrol vehicle creates obvious safety and policy concerns. So, while the request may seem simple from his point of view, it's one they are almost certain to refuse. At this moment, both sides are still standing at a crossroads. One decision could end the night with a hotel room, the other could end with handcuffs, and unfortunately, that choice is about to become very clear. What happens here is something officers encounter more often than many people realize. Just moments earlier, the man was refusing every option that had been offered to him. He insisted he wasn't leaving without his alcohol, challenged the officer's authority, and repeatedly rejected alternatives that would have ended the encounter peacefully. But once the handcuffs go on, the emotional tone changes almost instantly. He apologizes. He tells the officers he's an addict, and for the first time during the encounter, he acknowledges that alcohol may be controlling his behavior. That doesn't erase what happened, and it doesn't automatically eliminate criminal responsibility, but it does remind us that many police encounters involve more than simple criminal intent. They often involve addiction, mental health struggles, emotional instability, or impaired judgment. At the same time, it's important to recognize the position the officers are in. They are not addiction counselors, and they're not there to determine whether someone deserves treatment instead of prosecution. Their immediate responsibility is to restore order, protect the property owner's rights, and resolve the situation safely. Once someone repeatedly refuses lawful instructions to leave private property after consent has been withdrawn, officers may have limited practical options remaining. That's one reason body camera footage can be so valuable. It allows viewers to see not only the final arrest, but everything that happened beforehand: the repeated offers, the warnings, the explanations, and the opportunities that existed before enforcement became necessary. Whether you sympathize more with the woman, the man struggling with addiction, or even both of them, this case illustrates how quickly an emotionally charged domestic dispute can evolve into a criminal matter, not because of a single dramatic act, but because a series of small decisions gradually closed off every peaceful exit.